Story 1. My father was dying of cancer, and the medication took his muscle mass and the calcium off his bones. He stood up from his chair, his legs gave out, and 3 vertebrae crumbled from the fall. The noise he made trying to get up was something I actually repressed. I only remember calling my sister and saying, "He's in a lot of pain," and that it didn't sound like it does in the movies. Story 2. This isn't mine but my aunt's story. She is heavily traumatized because of this. My 2 cousins had just left for school on the bus, as a freshman and sophomore in high school. My aunt was gently shaken awake by her husband about 2 hours after they had left. She looked at him and asked, "What?" He looked her in the eyes and just said, "I want you to see this." He pulled a gun from behind his back and shot himself in the head as he stood over her. She never once stepped foot into that home she had owned for 20 years ever again. She refused to even go back in that direction. She moved in with my grandmother for a bit and has lived in an apartment alone ever since, drinking herself to near death. She doesn't want the help. She just wants to smoke, drink, watch television, and sleep. Her kids visit, but it's difficult for them to see her like that as well. It's been years now, and it's just the new normal. Story 3. I saw a college-aged kid die right in front of me after he crashed into a tree in my yard. His last words were, "Help me," while he was gurgling out blood. Then he slumped forward with his eyes rolled back in his head. It happened over 20 years ago, and that moment still pops into my head like it just happened. Story 4. When my daughter was stillborn, they brought her into the recovery room so that we could say goodbye and have some pictures taken. I don't regret having done it, but it was hard. Story 5. I was caring for my uncle. He had bowel cancer. I went and let myself in, and I found him on the floor. His stomach had ripped open where they had an operation months prior. Straight up the middle, body fluids and blood spewing out. I held his stomach together for 40 minutes and put pressure on. Waiting for an ambulance to come was a nightmare as there were severe delays, and I couldn't get him into the car. He died a week later. 7 years later, I still think about it. Story 6. My 13-year-old brother was vomiting blood, a lot of it, filling the basin. He was recovering from surgery to remove benign tumors in his face and throat, and the wounds weren't closing properly. They would open up and drip blood down to his stomach, where it would pool until he expelled it. I held his back and the basin while my parents ran around packing for another medical jet to the only hospital in the state that would take him. He died 3 years later. Story 7. A lot more than I needed to have seen, but when I was 5 or 6, I woke up to my grandma and dad panicking because someone had snuck onto the farm in the night and poisoned the drinking water in all of the water troughs, even for the chickens. She raised sheep, rabbits, chickens, a couple of retired trail horses, peacocks, ducks, every stray cat in the country, and we had a pony. She kept little minnows in the barrels and some troughs, and they were all floating on the surface of the water when I went out in my taimen and pumba nightgown. I saw them trying to cover all the animals with whatever tarps they had so all of the children didn't see. There were 3 of us young kids living there and 2 cousins who visited daily. My dad explained what happened and told me I could cut some of my pony's mane to keep her memory with me. We had to stay inside the whole day, and I wasn't allowed to tell anyone else what happened. I overheard them talking openly about it. It was my mom's biker boyfriend and his friends who did it. The crimes escalated even further from there, but that was the one that stayed with me because my grandma had about 40 sheep. Not one survived. We ended up in a sort of outlaw witness protection about a year later. Story 8. I work in emergency veterinary medicine, so I've seen things you wouldn't believe. A happy pit bull with a hatchet in his head and his tail wagging, dogs hit by lawnmowers, all sorts of things. But the thing that still haunts me is watching a grown man choke and punch a child that was maybe 6 in a gas station parking lot. Oh my God. It was absolutely horrible. I got out to stop him, and the man drove off, so I followed him while I called the police. They got behind him, pulled him over, and told me I could leave. I hope they took the kid away, but I'll never know. I still think about it from time to time because the kid looked so defeated and empty. It was truly haunting. He never fought back or even held up his arms. He just cried, and I know it's because that guy has done that before, who knows how many times. Story 9. 1 month before her wedding about 18 years ago, my sister was ejected from a vehicle as her fiancé was driving, hit by someone running a red light. I got a phone call from mom. She was frantic. XXXX has been in an accident. We don't know how bad. Meet us at the hospital. I ran out of work and got there as fast as I could safely. We were asking, where is she? What room? We beat the ambulance there. Then we saw a gurney being rushed down the halls. I looked over and it was my sister. Her face cracked open as if you were to drop a watermelon on concrete. She had spinal fluid coming out of her ears. I told myself, that can't be my sister. It was. She survived miraculously. 2 months in the intensive care unit, they put her face back together. When she was getting discharged, all the doctors and surgeons called her the miracle girl in the ICU, saying we should be planning a funeral, not a coming home event. I'll never forget her moans and sounds as she was whisked by us on that gurney. She got married months later, as she needed lots of physical therapy. The only reason she's alive is because of where the accident happened. There was an off-duty paramedic whose yard she landed in. She went a good 20 to 25 feet out the window. He grabbed his kit and began working on her immediately. He came to her party that was thrown as a fundraiser. He came to shake my hand and introduce himself. I grabbed him and sobbed while giving him a huge hug. I'll never forget him. Story 10. A guy who jumped off a small tower outside our local cathedral. Back when I worked as an emergency medical technician. He was high on something and was convinced he could fly. Instead of flying, he literally face-planted on the concrete slabs at the bottom. When we got to him, he was still alive and breathing, and as it was a cold, foggy night in the middle of winter here in Britain, the oddest thing was that you could see his breath. This isn't odd in itself apart from the fact it was red. We couldn't even find anywhere to put in an oropharyngeal airway. His face, or what was left of it, was so damaged. And the noise I won't forget until my dying day. I don't know how to describe it, but it was awful. Story 11. Recently a car came flying past us, driving erratically. We were doing about 78 miles per hour, so this car was going 85 to 90. The driver lost control and hit a retaining wall. My daughter, who is an emergency medical technician, went running to the scene to help. One person was dead at the scene, and the other was near death. I never could find an update on the survivor. Story 12. I was sitting in my car, waiting in the middle of the road with the hazard lights on. A young boy was chasing his dog up the perpendicular road. As soon as the dog crossed, another car came towards me and the tires ran exactly over him. I thought he might have made it when I saw it coming. It all happened in a flash. The dog flopped around for a few seconds, with the boy sobbing over him. Then it died, and I watched the boy carry the lifeless body away. I wish I would have honked, flashed my lights, something, anything, but it all happened so fast. Story 13. When my family and I were on vacation on an island, I slipped and fell on cement stairs. I broke my arm. It was literally wavy, and a bone was sticking out. I had to travel 4 hours by car and ferry, looking at my lopsided arm. Literally traumatizing. Story 14. Oh crap. There are so many that stand out. I was in Vietnam on patrol boats. We had a program where we would sometimes take a Navy corpsman medic place to place small villages. A friendship program. The corpsman would dispense vaccinations, shots of penicillin, clean up injuries and wounds, maybe throw in some stitches. Those people did not have a doctor to go see. The boat crew I was with would buy sweets and treats to pass out to the kids and such. It was nice. You got to feel friendly towards those people. Then this one day we stopped at one place to find smoke in the air. When we got there, the village was destroyed. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army had decided those villagers should be taught a lesson for being friendly to us. They were dead. All of them, except maybe 5 I saw who had made it to a hiding spot. Men, women, children, babies, the chickens and livestock. Obviously, a number of the women had been violently raped, some of them barely old enough to be in school. The head of the village had died hard. They had castrated him, shoved his stuff in his mouth, had him tied to a post, and had cut him so many times you could not count. then built a fire to burn him. I saw a little girl, not more than 3 or 4, who had been gutted. That haunted me a long time. Also Vietnam. My best friend bleeding to death in my arms and not a damn thing I could do to stop it. The injuries too massive. His last words were his worry about who would take care of his wife now. My wife. Aneurysm. Doctor came out and told me she was only still alive due to the machines. Her brain showing she was brain dead on the monitor. And she asked me what I wanted to happen. My wife of 41 years and I had discussed such things. She did not want to live as a vegetable or total invalid. And I had promised her. So I went in, kissed her, and pulled the plugs myself. Hardest thing I ever had to do. Not only did she die, so did a part of me, the best part. Story 15. Burnt dead bodies on the way out of Kuwait. I still have the smell in the back of my mouth anytime I smell barbecue. I don't eat much grilled food anymore. Story 16. Working in an emergency room, just bedside registration, as a young 20-something. I had seen dead bodies on this job before, but that night was much worse. We had a very elderly lady come in alone with an upper gastrointestinal bleed. Coffee ground emesis. Definitely seemed out of it and wouldn't or couldn't speak. I remember halfway through my shift, she was being wheeled back out to an ambulance. Still vomiting, did not look better at all. She locked eyes with me in the hall as we passed each other. I asked our charge nurse if the patient was going to a bigger hospital, since ours was smaller and had fewer resources. She said, "No, honey, she's going home to die." I will never forget the look in that patient's eyes. She looked so defeated. It was horrible. I'm so grateful there are folks willing to work in emergency medicine because that is not for the faint of heart. The idea of dying alone and so sick is terrifying to me. Story 17. I used to live by a highway where the speed limit was 75, but it had one of those flashing lights to turn down my road. People missed it and wrecked all the time. One night I heard a loud bang and ran down to help. A totally lucid and coherent man, covered in blood with his face caved in, was still talking and wondering why it felt weird when he did. I don't think I even told anyone else but my grandpa about that. I guess it's one of those things you block out over time. Story 18. Holding my premature firstborn while she struggled to breathe on her own and passed away in my arms. She was born at 22 weeks after the hospital sent me home the night before without checking my cervix and telling me I was just having ligament pain. My water broke less than 24 hours later, and they had to induce me the next day because her foot was already in the opening. Then they refused to help her when she was born alive because she wasn't 23 weeks. A few years later, I was holding my grandma's hand at the same hospital while she was in the intensive care unit when she passed away. I still have issues when I need to go to that specific hospital. Story 19. In Kunar, Afghanistan, most of the country, really mentally disabled children were sold as sex slaves. As we drove or walked by, the old men would stretch the boys' mouths open to show us their value. We'd usually give them their $2 to $5, take the kid somewhere we could get him on a helicopter, and let the people in the rear deal with it. Heading out on a mission that involved several false insertions, we came across a young boy for sale that we really couldn't take with us as we were just about to set up to catch a maker of improvised explosive devices. The old man tried to bargain, dropped his price, and so on, but we had to decline and couldn't even take him to the next village as our target was closer. As we pulled away, the turret gunners started yelling to look behind us. The old man had slit the boy's throat, nearly decapitating him, then threw him under the tires of a passing Afghan National Army truck. I saw a lot of death over there, and that incident showed just how little value they put on life. Story 20. I was on a party street in Shanghai with a group of Americans. This woman walked into the restaurant next to us. Chaos broke out inside. A man inside violently assaulted the woman. She was bloody. The noises she was making were animalistic. She was being dragged by her hair. She finally managed to lock herself in a bathroom. We were able to contact the police and get them there. They told us to leave. It haunts me to this day. We didn't know what to do. Story 21. Watched a Fighter 14 hit the back of an aircraft carrier. It was surreal. Pearl Jam was blaring in the background and I still can't listen to their music. Story 22. Walking through downtown Washington, D.C. on September 11th, people were frantically running away from the city because we didn't know where the fourth plane was. I was running across the 14th Street Bridge and looking up the Potomac River for the plane, and then I passed someone leading a blind man out of the Pentagon into the city. I just stopped because I realized no place was safe. The smoke from the burning Pentagon lingered around our subdivision for about a week afterward. Story 23. A mutilated human in the middle of a busy highway. He was in several pieces and lying there in nothing other than his underwear, as his other clothing was scattered all over with other parts of him. Story 24. I was a freshman in high school, and an acquaintance wanted someone to hit him on the head with a skateboard. One of my best friends at the time agreed to it. Once he hit him, he collapsed into a seizure. I caught him so he wouldn't hit the ground, but he died immediately in my arms. I still think about that day a lot, and it was 21 years ago.